First, let me say that I'm extremely pleased to be a part of this meeting. And it is a meeting which I think is meant to bring to the fore some of the critical issues around the treatment and the handling of vulnerable persons in our community, especially in conflict situations. The Chibok girls obviously remain the focus of a lot of our attention on vulnerable persons, but also we must remember, of course, that even before the Chibok girls, the Bunuyadi boys in the Bunuyadi Government Secondary School in Yobe State, who were killed, 59 of them killed in their boarding house. Just a couple of months before the Chibok incident. And of course several others who had been abducted and who had been and who were killed at various times even before those incidents. But there's also, even in non-conflict situations, I'm sure many of us will remember just very recently in Lagos, the kidnap of 3 girls in a secondary school in Lagos. That was not a conflict situation, but nevertheless it still exposed the fact of vulnerability, especially of certain of women, girls in our society. But I want to just emphasize that what has engaged my own thoughts for a long time, and since being in government, is really the interconnectivity of many of the issues. And I think it was Aisha who talked about, and also I believe I talked about the questions of poverty and how poverty generally, as an overarching issue, exposes state systems, exposes, the institutions of state itself to and make them almost incapable of being able to solve the problems without addressing those fundamental questions first. I recall that at one of the first meetings I held with those who are concerned in one way or the other with running the economy and trying to prepare a budget. This was even before the ministers were appointed. But there seemed to be a problem around the whole concept of what a budget should be. What our preparation should be for the country. The way that many have been, and this is in some sense an ideological issue, because the way that many of us have been, if you like, have been brought up and have been taught in schools and all of that, is to look at the economy as essentially, facts and figures, but around sustaining industry, around sustaining enterprise, and around sustaining, institutions that, as it were, produce some public good. But the question, of course, is that in societies where you have extremely poor people, very many and large numbers of extremely poor people, there must be a different way of looking at how you prepare and how you plan for that society. In other words, you must have some, you must have perhaps a greater attention must be paid to how to provide for the very large numbers of the poor who cannot catch up in any way, or who simply cannot even benefit from the public good that business or enterprise might produce, because they are so disempowered by their poverty, and who cannot even wait for whatever it is that will be delivered by enterprise, by business and all of that, because they are far too poor and cannot even, and may not even be able to last long enough or live long enough to benefit from those things. So there's a sense in which, we must pay some attention to the whole, for how we design, government programs, how we design budgets, how we plan for those things, so that we take into account the great poverty of our people. And then, of course, questions of education, healthcare, and all of that go around that, especially education and healthcare for the most vulnerable, people. I think that really is the soft underbelly of our institutions and of our systems, and which expose the most vulnerable to the harshest possible conditions. And the fallout, and it's only a fallout, it's just collateral damage, that vulnerable people are exposed even more in conflict situations. The truth is that vulnerable people are exposed, they are exposed to the harshest conditions, even from everyday life, aside from conflict situations and all that. And that's why, one of our chief concerns as a government has been the social intervention, the social investments which we are trying to make and which was provided for in the budget. About 500 billion has been provided for interventions, for social interventions, including conditional cash transfers to the very poorest, including loans to market women and persons who are engaged in informal trade, about a million of those. Even in compiling the names of list of those who are the poorest, and I thought that perhaps in the discussion, Miriam might give us some further perspective. Even in compiling that list, of course, it's a very difficult process, trying to compile a list of the poorest in society. But we've been greatly assisted by the World Bank, and I believe the Bill Gates Foundation has also helped a great deal in that respect. But you go to a community and you're saying, okay, let's look for the 4 poorest local governments, in a community, and then the poorest in those communities. It's a very difficult process because you are skipping over so many who are poor anyway, but you're looking for the very poorest of the poor. So even that itself is a very challenging enterprise. But I believe very strongly that the commitment to doing this is an important one, and is one that we must push, because there must be some direct intervention in the lives of those who cannot afford to help themselves in any way. And that direct intervention must come from government funding of those sorts of programs which enable people to at least do something for themselves. And as they're able to do so, to then be able to partake of the institutional advantages that come from enterprise and from other more formal methods of lifting people out of poverty. That for me, I think, is an important issue, and I hope we'll probably have more time to talk about that. But I think that it's very important that we bear in mind that all of these things are tied to poverty. The other issue is the issue of corruption. And I think that it's almost impossible for us to really deal with these issues without dealing with the issues of systemic corruption. Because systemic corruption not only impoverishes, but it also further endangers the most vulnerable in society. Because what you find is that because corruption and the sort of corruption that we have seen is so deep and so ingrained in society, and so ingrained especially in government and the structures, it's sometimes extremely difficult to deliver any sorts of services even to the people. And you find that one of the most frequent criticisms, or the most frequent objections, if you like, to even some of the schemes that government proposes is that how will it ever work? People are going to divert the funds, people are going to do something or the other. So there is even a great deal of cynicism, because people generally tend to expect that government and official organs generally are so deeply involved in corrupt activities that they're not likely to deliver the goods. And I think that has been shown, especially from some of what we've seen in the way that funds meant for the prosecution of the war were diverted in the past few years, and other ways in which funds meant for social for social upliftment of people and for other, useful causes have been diverted. I believe that we must deal with the questions of corruption. I believe that it is at the heart of everything that has gone wrong in this society. And I believe that we cannot ignore it. We cannot pretend that we can go very far without dealing with it. Now, how to deal with it, of course, is to make sure that people who are corrupt are dealt with and that there is consequence for corruption. But even going forward, ensuring that the systems do not permit corruption. In other words, ensuring that systems do not give so much discretion to individuals so that they are not able to present themselves or to present institutions as in such a way that they are rent-seeking, or in such a way that they are roadblocks to people who want to take genuine benefits from government in one way or the other. So I believe strongly that we must deal with issues of corruption in a systemic fashion, and these are issues, of course, that are much larger than the discussion around the table, but I think that these are very important points to consider even as we go forward. The other point which I'd like to emphasize is also the fact that if you look, and I think it was Aisha who talked about education, and the lack of education and the problems associated with that. Now, of course, we recognize that in a federation such as we have, the federal government has responsibilities of its own. State governments and local governments have responsibilities of their own in education. But I think that there is very little advocacy around ensuring that states, local governments, and the federal government make substantial provision for education in their budgets. I think that we talk about education and healthcare in the context of some other things, but it's important, in my view, to have a lot more advocacy around saying to the state governments that they must be held to account for the number of those who are out of school. I mean, the question of primary school education, for example, it is the responsibility of the state government, responsibility of the local government to ensure that children are in school, the primary schools, and especially primary education. And I think that we must advocate, and we must, I think that we must make the point as clearly and as stridently and consistently as possible that some have to be held responsible for the number of people who are out of school. The federal government, of course, also has a very serious responsibility around ensuring that there is, especially primary education with UBEC and some of the other organs that assist with primary education. But I think there has to be a far more advocacy around that, because education, of course, means, it of course opens the doors that very little else can open. And I think that especially in some of where we've seen, and girl child education in particular is one that has suffered greatly in this manner. Of the 10.4 million children that are said to be out of school, say primary school, the vast majority of those, of course, are female children. And I think it's important that we really advocate very stridently around these questions of education. I'm not going to talk too much yet, I think, except of course if there are questions around it about some of the other issues around security. But I just want to say that, at every Security Council meeting that I've attended, there's been a lot of, the President in particular has always, been very concerned about the question of the Chibok girls in particular. And of course it comes out of a feeling that, look, this is something that, aside from the great importance internationally that is attached to it, but I doubt whether there is any parent, and he's the father of several girls, and I don't know if there's any parent who really doesn't every once in a while just reflect, what if these were my own girls, And I think that that's something that he repeats every time, that look, I have daughters, but if they were my own daughters, how would I feel, And I think it's that feeling of, that feeling of, look, how can we get this done quickly that, pervades every single Security Council meeting that I've attended. But of course, it's a very delicate issue. I don't think it's the sort of thing that we can say, well, by next week, we're going to have dealt with the problem. There's just no way we can say that. Not only because of the type of situation that it is, but also because even every rescue attempt must take into consideration the safety of those girls. So I think I trust that the security that our security apparatus and the military, the regular updates that they're able to give from the security perspective and their commitment to it, I trust that we will get that we will be able to bring back those girls. I really believe that we will be able to do so. But I also want us to, bear in mind that yes, this is a front burner issue for us. But at the same time, we must exercise some caution and patience, and not sound as if, well, this can be done, but it's not being done. I don't think that's right. I believe that everything that can be done, especially with respect to the rescue of those girls, is being done. But there are, of course, challenges, and we're trying to address those challenges. There's both local and international support for this whole effort. Internationally, we have been assisted, information-wise and all of that, intelligence-wise and all of that. And I think that we will eventually bring back the girls, and I pray that that will be very, very soon indeed. Finally, just from the point of view of how this, at least for me, how this plays out for me, I think that while campaigning, I went, practically everywhere. And everywhere when people actually asked, even when I was in the bus in Lagos, people actually asked me, look, so what will you people do about the Chibok girls? If you live in Lagos and you're so far away from all of these things, you don't usually think that perhaps somebody on the street would be that interested, but everywhere I went, people actually asked, whatever we could do about the Chibok girls. And I think that, there's just people just feel inside of them that, well, you guys must be able to do something, and that you must do something. I'm glad that there is hope that we can do something, and that the cynicism generally around government hasn't completely obliterated our hope, and just something that happened when we went to Borno State we went around the IDP camps and saw there was this little girl called Aisha, by the way, whose fingers and her face was barely 18 months old at the time, who was in a suicide bombing situation somewhere in Borno State and was in hospital, and I'd seen her with her mother there. And it was just so sad just looking at this little baby, and her mother, of course, holding her. She had burns everywhere, fingers and all of that. So I said to her, more out of emotion than any real plan, I said to her, we're going to come back, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to make sure that we do something about you, about your daughter. So I interpreted it to her. And she said, thank you very much. So some months later, some of those who worked with me in my team, kept reminding me, we haven't done anything. Anyway, we finally got around to asking a surgeon in the US, a Nigerian surgeon in the diaspora, who also was interested in this, to come over and do this. And they did an operation in the National Hospital, all expenses borne by the surgeon himself, bore most of the expenses for his own trip and all of that. And several other people made their contributions. But what was interesting for me, and of course the operations still go on, they still have 2 or 3 more procedures to go through. But what was interesting for me was that the woman said to me that when you said you will come back, I knew you would come back. I was really quite amazed by that, you know. And I asked her, so why do you think I'll come back? She said, I just knew you'll come back. And it just struck me that despite the hopelessness, I mean, she had no way of knowing who I mean, she probably had never ever seen my face before or anything. Probably just recognized that, well, this man is a government man or whatever. But I think that what that brought home to me was just the fact that despite everything, our people still believe in us. And when I say us, I'm talking about government, I'm talking about the leadership in society. That people still believe that we can do something. People haven't lost hope. They still believe that, yes, you people, despite all your failings and many times that you say and you don't do, we believe that you can still do something. And it's in that for me was extremely encouraging, and really, I hope that's encouraging also for all of us who have to do something about the situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.